hard things to admit that you were going through behind the scenes and mentally while you were setting up your private practice and your coaching practice and becoming a mom. Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to the Motherhood Cadence podcast and YouTube channel. Today I'm meeting with Krysteena from Align Therapy Shop and the Private Practice Lab to talk all things how we got into the therapy field, how she got started, and how we encourage people to build businesses on their terms and what that has looked like for her and for us. And I hope you enjoy. Well, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tell me a little bit about how you started your private practice. What got you into private practice?
Yeah, so private practice was a long time in the making. I think when I was a young 20-something college student, grad student, I had an idea that I wanted to own a business someday. I always have had an entrepreneurial spirit. I joke that it's real, but I joke that I had a face painting business when I was 10 years old. I made flyers and went around to my neighbors and offered to paint their faces for money.
Nice.
So I've always had that in me, but I just never really knew how to get there. And I went to grad school in Southern California, in LA. I grew up in Southern California. At the time in California, after you graduated, you were still considered an intern. And you may have experienced this as well. But you couldn't get your license until you had reached the 3,000 hours post-grad as an MFT, which really made some difficult job opportunities in trying to get a paid position. Because if you couldn't bill insurance, you couldn't get paid. And so I had colleagues that were working several years for free as a therapist, a post-grad therapist. I couldn't do that. I had to pay my bills. I had no support. And so I worked in a medical office during the day. And then in the evenings and weekends, when I did finally find a $12 an hour paying job, I did that. And I worked 7 days a week for years. And after, I hit major burnout, in 2015, I moved to Idaho because I've had family here for a really long time. I used to visit here in summers and things like that. And I thought I was going to leave the field. I spent about 9 months kind of soul searching and trying out other things and, thinking I'm just going to do something else that I don't really have a passion for because I can't afford to be a therapist. Long story short, I gave it one last shot, started working in an agency here, actually got a salary that was still low, but it was more than I'd ever gotten paid before. And after that, after I kind of got my feet under me a little bit and was like, okay, I actually do like this. I actually can do this. I think that my barrier before was just that I wasn't making any money. And so I couldn't afford to take care of myself. And so I got in my head, all right, I need to make a plan. I'm going to learn as much as I can in this environment. And then I'm going to start my business. And I remember when I started just as a case manager first because I was going through all these hoops to try to get licensed in Idaho. And then I got promoted pretty quickly at that agency to a supervisory position. Mm-hmm. And in that interview for the supervisory position, the director at the time was like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I was like, I'm going to own a business. And they still hired me.
Which is great.
They weren't threatened by that. Yeah, which is great. And so I basically learned all that I could about just the lay of the land in Idaho and insurance and mental health and everything. And I hit a point where I was working a lot. I had encountered some health issues. I just wasn't my best self. I was planning to get married. I wanted to take off a good chunk of time for my wedding. I didn't have enough PTO to do it. And so I was like, well, now is as good a time as any. So I'll just quit my job right before my wedding day and then start a private practice. And so I did.
Nice.
I literally got married, took some time off, and then jumped right into my private practice.
I love that. I laughed when you mentioned that you started off as a case manager. So when I graduated in California and I was also faced with, you're going to have to be an unpaid intern, I was like, no, not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I had family in Oklahoma. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go get licensed in Oklahoma. But in order to transfer all the hours that I'd done in practicum, it took time to like get into their system to do my like clinical hours post grad. But I did it in much less time than most of my peers because I got a full-time salary job when I was an associate, and they call them associates, what California calls interns.
Hmm.
Um, and in Oklahoma, I could work full time. And because I was working at an agency, I didn't have to have my own insurance billing. I billed through the agency. And so I got to do all that. And then I got to work a second job with the same agency as a 1099 contractor to make extra money and do extra hours. And
Hmm.
so like, but I started at that agency as a case manager or a case manager one, I think is what the state labeled me, as they waited for all my paperwork.
Yeah.
But I had friends that I graduated with that were like still waiting for all their hours so they could take the California exam so they could become MFTs. And I was like working my way through everything. And then when I moved here, it took a year once I started the process. It took a year to transfer my license. So yeah, but the
Yeah, I
move
think we
to
have a
Oklahoma was
very
like
similar
important.
trajectory then. And it's so wild, the
Yeah.
vast differences in the states with the
For
same
sure.
exact degree and career choice. You know, and
Yeah.
California, I think, is notorious. They have their own exam, they have their
Hmm.
own process. You know, all the other states have, they just take the national exam. I'm
Yeah.
actually an LCPC in Idaho because it was just easier than getting my MFT and trying to get everything transferred from California, even though I technically went to an MFT program.
Right. Yeah. My program was shifting from just MFT to doing LPC stuff as well because California was moving that direction. But
Yeah.
I didn't take the added coursework that would be necessary. But the requirements are so different. What Oklahoma requires was like so much lower than what California requires. So it was so much easier because they were like, yeah, you have everything. And I was like, yeah, because California's got the strictest like requirements.
Yeah, they
So
really do. And how can you afford to work for free living in California? It's,
exactly.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a whole tangent I could go on. I'll save it. I'll
Yeah.
stop myself.
But I can agree with you for sure because
Yeah.
you know, yeah, we both had similar reactions to being like, no, I have to find a different way. I have to find something else. So,
Hmm.
uh, and now not only do you have your practice, but you're also a coach to help people start their private practices. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started my second business, Align Therapy Shop, in the end of 2023. And I had an interest in going into coaching shortly after I started my private practice. One of the reasons I also wanted to go into my own business is because I'm a person of a lot of interests. I get bored pretty easily. And so I want to keep learning. And I wanted to do things like this. I wanted to do podcasts. I wanted to write. I wanted to teach. I wanted to work outside my office as well as with clients. And I had tried to do some dating coaching for a little while because my specialty in
Okay.
my practice is relationships. And for whatever reason, I love talking about relationships in a therapeutic sense with my clients. But when I took it into the coaching world, it just wasn't there for me. Like I kind of took on a couple clients and then I was like, huh, why is the fire not there? You know?
Yeah.
And then fast forward to 2023, I had some life events happen, and my son at the time was almost 3, and I felt like I had the capacity to start going back toward my goals. And I started creating worksheets on Etsy, intended for grad students and new therapists to kind of help them just have some tools for their sessions because I remember feeling really lost when I first started in
Mhm.
the field and I just felt like a fish out of water. Like, what am I supposed to do with these people in my office? I feel like I didn't learn anything, even though I just finished 3 years of my graduate education. And
Right.
then I decided to market it on Instagram. And what I found on Instagram was like an entire world of therapists that were just hungry for information. And I
Mhm.
started talking to them and meeting people really quickly. and they were asking me questions about like, how did you get into your private practice? And I had some friends around here too, some colleagues who had kind of watched what I had done with my practice and would reach out to me for advice or tips or whatever. And I quickly realized, like, oh, there's a need here. There's a pretty serious need. And I thought that my story, and similar to your story, just getting out of grad school, I kind of thought it was just me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
things are different now. There's no way it's that hard. Maybe I just made it hard on myself. Right. But then when I met all these other therapists 12 years after I graduated through the internet, who were
Right.
still
Yeah.
really struggling and still feeling really impostery and still feeling like they didn't have that support that they needed, I was like, this is it. This is it. And like, it just took off. Like, Align Therapy Shop was born, and I've just been riding the wave of momentum ever since. And I've absolutely loved it. And it's just been such a fun and rewarding experience that is different than what I get in the therapy room. Because I get to, I get to like heal a little past version of myself that I never had. This is like inner child work for your business. Like, that's kind of what I see it as. And I love being able to support therapists who had similar experiences that I did and just really needed someone to believe in them, and to give them a little bit of direction and motivation that, like, yes, you can do this and you can truly make a career that is going to be balanced and fulfilling, and you can help people and you can still be accessible and you can create a business that really aligns with your life, And yeah, so I'm still going, I'm still doing it, and it's been really awesome.
I love that. I actually found you through Instagram before we ever connected for this experience because of the Line Therapy Shop. But I wasn't looking, I was following therapists, but I was setting up a better way of coaching, of trying to figure out my coaching stuff. But
Mhm.
I knew that if I could get back into therapy, like back in community mental health was not the place. Like I needed to go private practice, which is what I'm doing now and have been doing for the past like 7 months now, 6 months now. But I wanted to get my coaching business on track, and that's how I found you. But I was like, this is all stuff that I like would have liked to have known. But what I always knew was like I was not the problem. I knew that my education was the problem because they did not prepare any of us for private practice.
Yeah.
And so what I was looking for was people like you, people like now I can't remember all their names, but there's a couple I follow on Instagram, one I follow on YouTube. And I was like, "Oh, I can apply some of this to my coaching practice, but I can also apply this if I go back, if I get my license back and I go back to like work as a therapist because we need these skills." And it's so nice to be in private practice. And I didn't even think opening a private practice I would get flooded with like my ideal kind of clients. But I have had all ideal clients since I opened my doors 6 months ago,
That's awesome.
and it's been lovely. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was a reel that you shared recently where you were sharing some of the hard things to admit that you were going through behind the scenes and mentally while you were setting up your private practice and your coaching practice and becoming a mom. And so, what was it like to build this coaching practice with some of these thoughts in the back of your head about income limits and feeling like, your own kind of imposter stuff? What was that like for you?
I think that even though I've always had this drive in me, because I had burnt myself out so early on in this field, that the first few years of my private practice, I really did chill. I embraced the slowness, I embraced the ease. I focused on motherhood, which is a huge adaptation, right? Like your first kid,
Yeah.
you're just like, whoa, my world is flipped upside down. And I embraced that. And then it also became my why. It's my biggest why for doing this. I went back to work at around 3, 4 months after I had my son, and my husband was in a corporate job that he just absolutely hated. It had totally been flipped upside down during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
He was working weekends and nights and on call all the time. And I was like, I don't want you to do this with
Yeah.
our family. And so having our son, and me going back to work and being in my own business actually convinced him to quit his job. And he stayed home with our son for about a year and a half, which he still looks back at on as like some of the fondest memories. And I do too, because we just got so much time together, which I know a lot of families don't get that in America. I felt so, so grateful for my business at the time. And my husband has gone back to work since, but he has a pretty easy job, a more flexible schedule. He's kind of the default parent whenever our kid is sick, stuff like that. And so it's on me to support our family. Like our roles are a little bit reversed from the traditional sense.
Mhm.
And so I want to give my kid everything that I didn't have, and so he's a huge motivator behind why I do what I do. I want more freedom. I want more flexibility. I want to be able to make an income when I'm at home with him, when we're out playing in the snow, when we're having fun. Like I want to have it all.
Right.
And
Yeah, of course.
I believe that you can. It's not easy, but I believe that you can. And I'm never going to get this time back with him. So I really want to like just focus on maximizing that.
Yeah. It's funny you say that about having it all, because one thing that I realized that I've narrowed in my own message of marketing for my coaching business is that you like talking to moms, you can have it all, but you can't do it all, at least
Hmm.
not all at once and not right now. And
Yes.
so finding that's really that rhythm, that's really what balance means. And so I like that you said that, because one of the beauties of like, especially now, I had the benefit of starting private practice as my kids were going to school for the first time. So like I was home with them. I was working in psychoeducation. I was teaching on a platform called OutSchool. So I was still running my own business, but it was more of an education business than a therapy business. And one of the things about starting my private practice is I got to build my like schedule around my kids' schedule. So other than Fridays, I do drop off and pick up. Fridays, I do drop off. My husband does pick up. He gets off work early because I work late. And then, but I was able to build around their schedule, which I think would have been an adjustment had I started private practice and then had kids.
Yes.
So, did you start private practice before you had your son or after?
I started it about, I got pregnant about 6 or 7 months after I started my practice, but it
Okay.
was with the intention of my husband and I had been together for a long time. We were getting married. We knew we wanted to try to have kids, shortly after.
Right.
And with the hours that I was working, I was like, there is no way. There is no way I'm going back to work at 6 weeks, working 8 to 6. Like, forget
Right. Yeah.
that. And so that was a push. And I hear that from so many moms too, like what actually pushes them to get into private practice, because as a therapist, we have such a bonus of having everything we need for our business in our brains and in our
Right.
bodies.
Yeah.
You are your brand, your knowledge is in your brain. Really, all you need is maybe an office space, but not even that. You just need a computer and you need
Right.
another person.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
so you can have so much flexibility, but people get stuck in these work environments where all of that gets taken away from them. And
Yeah.
it's even worse because you're getting paid on a billable hour. You're not getting paid for every hour worked. So you're working long hours, but not getting paid for all of them. I mean, I feel so, so fortunate that I took the leap and I did it when I did, because I know so many people that are out there with young kids and they're doing their best to make it work because they don't get paid time off. They don't get medical leave. Like our country just doesn't support new parents nearly to the point that they need to be. And people
Yeah.
are really trying their best to make it work, but it's just so, so, so hard.
It is very hard, especially just now that everything is more expensive. And I know for me, I did make the conscious decision to take a certain amount of insurances, but that doesn't work for every private practice therapist.
Hmm.
And so like it's making those decisions for your business. And what I found was especially in my coaching practice and what this podcast, YouTube is related to, I would be like, oh, I can't niche down because I'm going to leave someone out, and that's a therapy mindset is like you have to help everybody.
Yeah.
But one of the beauties of this is like I have been able to find ideal clients in therapy as well as in coaching. And in coaching, it's really women that are building businesses, not necessarily private practices, but just businesses in general that serve them and their families because it is so hard right now. And
Yeah.
because it's like we still have to bring in income even if we're going to work from home because like we still want to be there for those moments like you talked about the snow days and the
Hmm.
school drop off and pickup and who's like doing all of that stuff. And so it's really good to see even that we as women can run businesses like private practices because right now this space is inundated with just content creation and digital marketing, and it's like there's so many other skills and people are like it can even be as much as like setting up your own like medical clinic or your own photography studio or whatever it is, where I'm like helping moms just find that rhythm for them, which is one of the
Hmm.
things that really spoke to me about your content was because whether it's a mom or just someone in private practice in general, it's finding the rhythms that work for their life is
Yes.
a lot of some of the content that I've seen that you put out that's like, how do we fit this in the life that you want to build for yourself? So how do you what is your like process for helping yourself or clients do that? Like how do you find, because like I have my way of doing it, so how do you find the rhythm that works for them or help them identify that for themselves?
I am a values first kind of gal. Like it's
Same, very much same.
yes. And we might think that we know what our values are, but most people don't unless you
Hmm.
really take the time to sit down and unpack it.
Yeah.
And I do this. It's so funny the parallels that are between my coaching business, which is business coaching, and then also my therapy practice, which is on relationships and couples. Like I still go by this value first mentality. I do values work all the time with my couples and the individuals in my practice. I love ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, because it's pretty values heavy. And then in my business too, it's about figuring out like what is actually important to you at this time in your life. And then thinking about what is it worth it to you to get there and to find a way to make that work. And then also, I think we have to be realistic that it's going to come with trade offs as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
So I think about it. I don't know the name for this, but I tell my clients this all the time. It's like those little music boards if you're in a sound recording studio where they have a little dials that go up and down. And if you think about those dials as your values, they can't all be at max all the time,
Hmm.
right? Like they always have to be kind of, you have to be tweaking one, pushing one up, and then pushing another down. And so you need to really look at that and say, what is important to me at this point in my life? How do I want my life to look like? How do I want my days to look like? And then adjusting things around that to the best of your ability, right? To what you have control over. And that's why I love owning a business, because you have so much more flexibility. If I were employed by someone, I'd be a terrible employee for one, but I can't
Yeah.
do it anymore. I don't know how I did it for so long, but you don't have as much control over that. And I think you can still find ways to have control. It's, you can
Mhm.
advocate for yourself, you can adjust your hours a little bit, you can prioritize your time outside of work. But really, when you own a business, you can get super clear about what you want your life to look like. And it is possible to have it all. Like you said, you can have it all, but you can't do it all.
Yeah.
um, and just knowing that how this season of life is right now could be what's important to you right now, but a year, 2, 3 years from now, let's go back to the drawing board and relook at things, right? And do we need to
Yeah.
adjust some of those dials? And are things different for you? What is your capacity right now? How can we lean into what that capacity is? How can we scale back? And just really being intentional about that. I think so much of it is intention and
Yes.
showing up for your life in a way that you're not just going through the motions. Like what you're doing is because it's either important to you or it's what you want to do.
Yeah. And I focus on that word a lot, intentional, with my clients. And I'm trying to put more of that into my marketing because it is, like you said, in business, you have so much control over those dials if you're looking at it like that.
Mhm.
But it has to be intentional. Like,
Yes.
it was very hard, but intentional decision for me to like be building something from home after going on maternity leave because one of us would our entire salary would be going to daycare. for 2 kids, because our kids were 14 months apart, not planned, just happened. So
Yeah.
for 2 kids, it was going to be basically equal to our rent, essentially. And so it was okay, but I can't not bring in income. That can't be a thing. And so we have to find that. And we were blessed with a lot of really good family support that I know a lot of people don't have. So we had that as well. And my husband worked. But I use intentional a lot because you have to decide what's important. You can not do it all. If you want a perfect house, but you want to focus on your business, you might have to let some things fall by the wayside or bring in outside help or something, because otherwise you're just never going to sleep, and that's not okay. And so
Yeah, that's not
I
the
I
recipe for
really
disaster.
and I like to tell people, because I know like you're like with you helping people with private practices, you are a business coach. What I've started trying to be like really like emphasizing is like, I'm not a business coach. I'm for the women that have businesses, but I'm doing the business and life management part. Like, how do you
Yeah.
get that in line? And then I can connect you to other business coaches that can actually do the businessy stuff. Like, that's not my forte. And so, but it's all intentional, right? It's what is my intention here? What is important to me here? And to me, being with my kids has been really important. And I haven't always been perfect at it. Sometimes I get super hyper focused in like things, and I'm like, this is my whole personality right now. But like, I wanted to be there for my kids, and I haven't missed any of the firsts. I haven't missed any of the, the big things. And we have dinner every night. I'm the one that takes them to and from school. So, um, but one of the things I did appreciate was that you are vulnerable about some of those things that were like really hard to like talk about, like how long it took you to make a certain amount of money, which for us is they I don't know about your grad program, but where I went, they were like, oh yeah, when you start, you're going to start in community mental health and you're going to be making 30,000 a year, which at the time in California, because I graduated in 2015,
Mhm.
that's still not a lot. So I appreciate that you were sharing some of those things, like where your own imposter syndrome came in. So where do you think that vulnerability comes in your coaching practice to help people build their practices?
I think that vulnerability begets more vulnerability. And it's been a scary thing to show up like that online with thousands of people that I've never actually met face to face.
Right.
I'd be lying if I said that came easy for me.
Mm.
But I will tell you that the responses that I've received from people whenever I put out something like that, where I show a bit of my story, even if my heart is racing after I post it or after I send out that email or whatever it is, like the responses that I get from people that are like, I thank you so much. Like, I
Mm.
thought I was the only one,
Yeah.
and for so many years, I thought I was the only one, that something was wrong with me, that I couldn't make it work because I wasn't meant to be a therapist, that I was bad at being a therapist, that I didn't have what it took, that I just needed to, pull myself up a little bit more. I thought all of these critical thoughts about myself.
Mm.
And it wasn't really until I got like a good mentor that I started to feel a little bit more empowered and a little less alone. And so my goal is to hopefully be able to do that for other people by sharing vulnerability and letting them know like it's not just you, you're in a system that's pretty tough,
Yeah.
and we're just I mean, we're in a country that's pretty tough in a lot of ways. Like, we have a lot to be grateful for, but at the same time there's a lot of challenges. And so I
Yes.
think any way that I can make people feel less alone and empower them, like that's my ultimate goal.
I love that. And as we wrap up, I do have one more question. What would you like to share for moms that want to make money from home, start a business, whether even not necessarily a private practice? I know that's primarily who you work with, but like just in general, but are like holding themselves back for whatever reason. They feel like they can't do it, or it'll take too much time, or um whatever the reason. What would you tell them? What's something you might a few things you might leave them with?
I want to touch on something that you said a few minutes ago about intention and trade-offs. You were kind of carrying on that conversation. And I thought about this idea of integration
Mhm.
of rather than having a work-life balance, which is something I used to strive for. Now that I have a child and I have two businesses, and my business is part of a big part of my life and my
Mm.
family's life, I really focused more on integration and embracing that and knowing that it's not always going to mean that I walk into work at 9 a.m. and I walk out at 5 p.m. and then it's all done. On a good day, sure, that would be great. But sometimes I'm working at 6 a.m. and then I'm home with my sick kid all day, or we're playing, and then I work a little bit in the evenings and,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'm bringing my son into my office on the weekends and he's dancing to kids music and I'm cleaning the office. Like,
Right.
I feel like there is a way to integrate it with and still be a good mom. Like, I like that I'm showing this to my son and I'm incorporating him into my world and showing him what it means to really have a balanced life and what I feel like a balanced life looks like for us, not just where I'm gone all the time working, but where I'm actually including him, incorporating him into, I mean, sometimes even he's almost 4 now, he'll be 4 in a few weeks. Like the other day I was answering a couple emails right after dinner and he's like, "Mom, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm answering some emails for work. Do you want to see?" And he was like, "Push the P button, push the O button." And so
Right. Yeah.
he was like helping me type the email. And we don't do that kind of stuff all the time. But I think as moms, we can have a lot of guilt of not
Mhm.
being 100% present with our kid all the time. And as an attachment based therapist, there's a phrase called 30% parenting. And you really only need to be like that secure, focused, present parent 30% of the time in order to raise a secure child.
Mhm.
And some people might think about their history and be like, "Oh, wow, does that mean like my parents were not like they couldn't even do 30%, you know?" But I
Right.
think we're in an age of really intense parenting because we're trying to make up for past generations or whatever it
Right.
is. I don't know. We can go on a tangent with that. But I
Yeah.
think that, there are times where I am 100% present for my kid and my life. I do everything that I do for him and for our family and for our better future. And sometimes that does mean incorporating him into my work world. And I think that's okay. I think it's really
Yeah.
just, again, about knowing what your values are, finding that balance,
Mhm.
and knowing that there's a time to play and there's a time to work. And I love what I do. And so, I hope that he grows up to find something that he loves what he does too, so that it doesn't
Right.
ever feel like work. It just feels like fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I love that you talk about integrating it. I call it the rhythm. I
Oh,
use
yeah.
I use balance in my marketing because that's what people are always searching for, like work-life balance, but it's really a rhythm. It's what rhythm works for you and your family, including the times that they help you with your chores around the house. They help you cook. They help you. My kids love to watch when I'm like doing work stuff. And they also understand that when they're home from school and I have a client, they have to go in the other room. They can't come into my space because it's my client time. But they also know that if they were home today and we were having this, that they could like be around and it would be
Hmm.
okay. So I call it the rhythm. I help clients with that rhythm all the time. What is your rhythm that works for your family where they get to see, hey, mom's working and she's doing something she loves. And she doesn't just like leave and come back and leave and come back. It's like, oh, we get to be a part of something.
Yeah,
So
I love that. I think that's so great.
yeah,
It's
I
such
like it
good
a
role
lot.
modeling too, I feel like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also one last thing before we go, because because we're almost out of time, but like I love that 30% parenting that you just brought up because like it's hard to remember sometimes because we are trying to like make up for something or we feel that mom guilt.
Yeah.
And that's something I work with my clients on a lot is like letting go of that mom guilt because it's just our kids just need a lot of different kinds of interaction and attention and they learn skills from us and things like that. So I love that reminder too because sometimes I can get it too where I'm like, is this enough time? Am I like doing this or that? And so it's nice to hear about that.
Yeah. I say that out loud because I too have to remind myself of that all the time and give myself some grace and permission to find that rhythm, like as you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really loved this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to connect, and thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this. It was great.
Yeah, I appreciate it.